To follow along with this presentation, you'll want to turn to page 436, chapter 37, in How to Write Anything. We'll also get into a little tiny bit of chapter 38. As we look on page 438 and 439 in How to Write Anything, we can see some good definitions of what primary and secondary sources are. Ruskowitz says primary sources represent raw data, free of anyone else's opinions or explanations, actual evidence, also referred to as eyewitness accounts. Secondary sources are a step or two removed from the event, what others have discovered or claimed about a subject. Another way of considering sources is as unfiltered, which would be primary sources, again that idea of some raw data eyewitness accounts, or filtered, secondary, where it's filtered through the ideas of someone else who is writing about it and has already done that research, and you are going to be then getting that person's opinions or ideas, and so it is filtered through that person. Let's look at some examples, first of primary sources, and I'm not going to read just straight off the list here, but we can see that certain historical documents are definitely primary sources. You're getting those firsthand, and if you think about it this way, if you go read the Constitution yourself, you're getting the information firsthand, and that can be very helpful to see what the actual Constitution says. Sometimes, though, you need a secondary source where you are reading somebody's interpretation of what the Constitution says. And oftentimes people interpret the Constitution differently depending on their own beliefs about government and other things. And so looking at the Constitution itself can be helpful, but again, listening to other people who are experts analyze it and discuss it, that can also be helpful too. We can also see primary sources include correspondence, like people's letters, emails, tweets are considered a primary source, studies and government data that comes out. For example, you can look at a research study on brain cells put out by Indiana University, or maybe Indiana State Police put out some crime statistics. They haven't really commented on those. They're just putting the raw information out there. That's a primary source. Anything that's a creative work. So if you read a novel or a poem, that's a primary source. You hear a song on the radio, that's a primary source. You go look at a piece of architecture or go to a concert. Those are all primary sources. Maybe you read a newspaper or a magazine or an online website that talks about the newest Kanye West album. Now, if you listen to the album for yourself, that is a primary source. You read someone else's review about it, that is a secondary source. You read a magazine report on a new art exhibition. You're not there yourself to look at it, so you're reading the magazine report. It's filtered. So that's the secondary source. The art exhibition itself would be the primary source. Speeches are included into that. Autobiographies, people's journals, those are primary sources. Personal unedited interviews and surveys. Again, for papers that you work on, you might do surveys and get a bunch of information from people. That's raw, unedited information. That's going to be a primary source. You might interview somebody. Maybe you're doing a paper on a criminal justice issue. Lots of students do that here. And so you interview a police officer. Well, you're getting that raw, unedited information, and that's a primary source. But again, maybe you go to read a biography, or maybe you read an interview that's actually in a newspaper, or you watch it on TV. That's usually going to be edited, and therefore it's a secondary source. Hopefully these examples help you better understand. You should use some caution then when you use interviews that you might access on TV, radio, or even publications on the internet. These can provide some really great information, but you need to be careful that if you're required to use a primary source, you may not want to call this a primary source, because again, often what these television programs or radio programs do, they'll take pieces of the interview and they'll take some and use them, they'll take some and take them out. That's a very good thing. It keeps us from having to sit there through sometimes boring, sometimes unnecessary stuff. Sometimes people make mistakes and you need to edit it out. I edit these presentations for you quite a bit. But that also can make it less of a primary source, and sometimes even the people being interviewed had things they really wanted to say and a whole story they wanted to get across, and that'll be cut out of the finished interview. So I wouldn't really refer to those as primary sources.